Good evening, everybody. I am Virginia Hershik, the President and CEO at the Jewish Council. We are the co-host of the 11th Annual Gainesville Jewish Film Festival, along with the Center for Jewish Studies at the University of Florida. It's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight, which is the 7th night of the festival. We're a little over halfway through. And tonight we're going to talk about the light ahead, and my colleague, Gail Zachman, will be introducing our featured speaker. Thank you, Dr. Zachman.
It's a great pleasure to introduce our newest colleague, Roy Haller, who is a recent arrival at the University of Florida from Indiana University, where he got his PhD, which is a perfect fit. His research is a perfect fit for tonight's film. Roy works on passing in a comparative context. So the concept of passing in African-American literature, and applies it to Hebrew literature. I'll take the occasion as well to recognize that Roy's latest article on Dan Ben Amutz, who is one of the subjects of his research, recently won a prize. And we want to congratulate him and welcome to the University of Florida as our newest professor of Israel Studies.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Gail. Thank you for this introduction. I'm really glad to be here, and I'm really glad for the opportunity to speak at this festival and to present this very interesting film. The light ahead we're talking about. So I'm not a big Yiddishist, and but I like film, and I think there's a lot to like in this film, whether you speak Yiddish or not, whether you're Jewish or not, because it does touch on many topics that are actually more relevant this year than ever. I'll give a little introduction about the film and the background, and then we can take it up for a discussion. I'm sure there's a lot of you would have things to say. So the film was directed by Edgar G. Ulmer, who is really a solid professional Hollywood guy. He made A-list movies, A-list B movies, I should say. Some of them are quite famous. Some had big Hollywood names. I think one of the probably most recognizable is Black Cat. It had Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff. It was shot just a few years before his film we're talking about tonight. And he kind of worked across genres and languages and in many varied roles behind the camera, as a director, as an actor, as a set designer. So he was really an auteur, right? A Renaissance man, as we say. So he grew up in Vienna and claimed to have worked on big films in Europe, like Fritz Lang's Metropolis, and he was then invited to Hollywood in 1927 to be an art director on little films. And he had a Jewish background, pretty secular. He didn't speak Yiddish actually growing up, and he picked it up while working with the Yiddish actors, with the Yiddish Theater of New York. And he directed a series of Yiddish films. So he left Hollywood at this point of his career and settled in New York, and he produced a few ethnic films, actually, not just Yiddish Jewish. So he had 2 Ukrainian musicals. I mean, pretty random stuff. And then what we have tonight, right? Some low budget Yiddish speaking movies. And interestingly, it's sort of the height of the Yiddish cinema in America, and it's also the truly the beginning of independent cinema that we see, because these films were outside of Hollywood and independently produced. So the one we're talking about tonight was hailed as the best of his Yiddish films. The script was written by Omar and his wife Shirley, along with the Yiddish writer Chaver Paver. And together they adapted the story of Mendeley Mocher Sforim, the pen name of Yankev Abramovich, who has we see him portrayed in the movie, and he was really the grandfather of Yiddish literature. Shai Agnon called him the grandfather of Yiddish literature. And this gem of a movie was actually lost for years until this one copy resurfaced in one guy's private collection during the 80s. So it was partially restored back then, by the National Center for Jewish Film, and the version we're watching now is is digitally restored using modern technology, and it looks brilliant. It's great. It's really, they brought it up to its full glory. So it was made in 1939, which was amazing year for film. We had Gone with the Wind, Henry Ford Stagecoach, The Wizard of Oz. Frank Capra directed Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, right? The list really goes on. And kind of tragically, it was also a very good year for Yiddish cinema, kind of the last good year for Yiddish cinema. The original Tevya, Fiddler on the Roof, was filmed in New York City during the same year, for example. But tragically, because the year kind of marked the beginning of the end, right? The Holocaust, Jews around the world really started to feel the pressure in 1939, and we see it in the film, right? Although it's sort of titled "The Light Ahead," right? You have a sense of hope in the title. There's a very solemn atmosphere of dark, right? Of the darkness. That kind of awaits. And it's not just the Jews, the world versus the Jews, right? But there's also a very unique glimpse into the intricacies of the Jewish shtetl, right? The movie set up in a little shtetl, Glupsk. It's not very fond of shtetl life, I think. I mean, we see sort of dirty, filthy, a sickened place, right? I mean, there's beggars and peddlers, and there's overall a feeling of backwardness and unjustness. And then on the horizon, we have the film's Zion, the Odessa, right? Odessa, the big city, kind of waiting there for the characters. So it's sort of a war between the traditional and the modern lifestyle, between old-fashioned Jewishness and enlightened progressive Jewishness as well. Although I don't want to sound harsh. I mean, there are some beautiful scenes of the shtetl life. We could definitely kind of bring them up. I think that the Shabbat dinner scene, so kind of elegantly and romantically staged. This is really delicate camera work there. As it zooms into the chicken soup that's in the middle of the table, right, and then zooms out, and then everybody's kind of smiling. Marak of yesamach levav enosh, right? It gladdens the heart, the chicken soup. I think another interesting aspect of the film is that it's set much fittingly during the cholera epidemic, right? And we see how things, unfortunately, did not change in some aspects, right? We've had the same debates throughout the year, where funds should go, right? Why are hospitals underfunded and work to capacity? I mean, they're still debating in Washington whether to build more hospitals or to give more tax breaks to the rich, just like you have in the film. Debates about masks, no masks, vaccines, no vaccines. You have these questions in the film, right? Remember, like, why superstition over science? The film asks, and then we have the cholera wedding at the end of the film, and of course this year we also had a large number of pandemic weddings, or today it's Zoom weddings, we call them. I was actually in a couple, so I don't know if it was a conscious choice to release this film. It's this restored version now, right in the middle of COVID, but it's very fitting to this year we're living through, right? And I'll maybe say one more thing, and open it up, right? It's a very leftist film, right? A very political, a moralist film with a strong sense of the necessity of ethical behavior. We see that there are many ways to live an amoral life, where there's fraud, to take advantage of the poor, the sick, the marginalized. And in the center, Omar positions two noble characters, right? Hodel and Fishka, both great actors, and they really refuse to take advantage of their misfortune or be defined by their misfortune, right? Fishka doesn't want to be seen as a tramp. This is how the movie begins, right? He's a trampin because Hodel, because he was angry about Hodel calling him a tramp, and then we have Hodel who refuses to go corrupt, to beg as the blind girl for money, right? This is not the life they're wishing for. So I think this might be a good place to open up for discussion, to hear your thoughts. I mean, I really enjoyed. I rarely see classic films anymore, and it's a good classic American film. As much as it is Yiddishist and Jewish, I mean, it really was shot in sort of the heyday of the silver screen, and I'm sure you all have a lot to say. So I would just open it up. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Yes, Jack.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, of course.
One thing I did want to say, and that is that the importance of the film is not just that it's a 1939 Yiddish film, and that it comes just before the eve of the Great Catastrophe, but also that it's based upon a story by Mendele Mochesforen, who is the grandfather of Yiddish and certainly Hebrew literature, and was a bilingual writer in Yiddish and in Hebrew. As he leaves a huge imprint on Jewish literary activity, but also he's a remnant of the Haskalah, of the Enlightenment movement. And his characterization, the shtetl, is very, very negative. It's very very critical. His characteristic description of Jews in the shtetl was das kleine Menschele, the small man. And the small man, in Mendele's terms, was a fairly pejorative designation for the Jews who lived in these East European small towns. And we have a legacy of that continues well into Zionism, as you know, and into more modern Jewish literature. But here, of course, it's portrayed a little more sympathetically. So thank you for doing the introduction and for introducing all of us to one of the works of Mendele Mochesforen. Mendele means Mendele the bookseller, is what his pseudonym was. And I love the fact that he keeps appearing in the film as a book peddler. I think it's hysterical.
There's that wonderful moment as well where the woman goes over to the book peddler to say, "Do you have any book readings for women?" And of course, there's quoting going on there. So I want to ask you, if you want to talk a little bit more about that, sort of the intertext of literature, but also the apples. I thought were a lot of fun. The bringing of apples. I don't know if you noticed that or what you thought of that. Those scenes, those reads.
Who are you asking?
Yeah.
I was asking Roy, but I can ask you.
I haven't thought. Yeah, I haven't.
No, because I mean, when she goes to buy the book, right? And she said, "Do you have any literature or anything reading prayers for women?"
Yeah.
And she's looking for something for barren women. And what's the first thing he says? Abramovich, right? Well, not the first thing. It was the second thing after candlelighting. I think might have been the third. But then who's bringing her? I mean, she's supposed to be grabbing the apple on her own, and they're bringing her apples, and she's deciding, whether to taste them. So I didn't know if you sort of were going to give an Eve-like reading or had any reading of that character, because I thought the disabled characters were really interesting for the time. I mean, I was really surprised. I didn't know the film ahead of time by that and the way that played out and how much disabled characters disappeared for a long time before coming back to the screen.
But in Mendele, it's part of his criticism of the shtetl and
right, thickly, and you can't swim in the river, and the superstition play on enlightened Jews versus superstitious old-fashioned Jews in need of regeneration is pretty obvious, and certain scenes. But I just thought the apple was funny. I didn't know if anybody had a new.
Yeah, no, I kind of feel embarrassed because every time I teach kids literature, I'm like, did you see it? Do you see an apple? do you know? Every time you see an apple, you have to think about the context. I don't know. I was really moved by that scene. The sort of book, the book peddling scene. of course, he has these big books on kind of lining on the table, and then when the woman comes and asks if there's a reading material for women, he just gets out those little pamphlets, right? But they this kind of compensate over this by what happens next when she asks for a book of prayer for barren women, for women without children, and you see that either she can't afford the book, or doesn't have somebody who would say the prayer for her, which is why she wants him, she wants Mendel to recite the prayer, and he of course understands what's going on, and he says it most beautifully, right? He reads that prayer for that woman at that precise moment. But I don't know. I didn't think about the apples, and yeah, you're right. Apples pop up a bunch of times, and Hodel refuses an apple from Fishka one time.
But
I
the
think
one that tastes really good, and he's doing it
the
to
other
her.
guy,
She
right?
turns down the apples.
Yeah.
So I thought that was fun. But the book peddling, the peddling of Yiddish stories alone, lends that whole sort of framing. How does one peddle these stories and our stories, right? And you have the standard peddler, and you have the allusions to the literature that they're going to peddle, plus the film, going forward and peddling it was, sort of fun mise en abîme, I thought.
But it also makes this interesting link between sexuality and literature, and the transgressiveness of modern Jewish literature. It's partly why it would be so disparaged by more traditional people. It would be hated as something that's depurifying more traditional Jews. It's like the apple in the Garden of Eden. That's what you're referring to, right?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to miss.
I don't know.
So yeah, and if you speak about the purifying, of course, the bathing in the river turns out to be sort of the film's most dramatic points, because after that, this bathing was supposed to be a cleansing ceremony, right? It turns into the tragedy of the village as the women sort of get sick and die one by one.
Mm. I thought I'd point out also that the idea of the wedding of the poorest people, the most decrepit people of the Nishtetl, is indeed an age-old tradition of how you cure the town from a plague, is that you create a wedding. And the wedding is you take the people who there's no way they could get married otherwise, they wouldn't have the money for it, etc. And so you just match them up, and then you perform the wedding ceremony. And oftentimes you do it in the cemetery, and it's called a Schwarze Chassid.
Wedding, yeah.
I heard Magefe
Plague
yeah,
wedding. Yeah,
wedding.
there's
Oh,
plague.
yeah, it was definitely a folk ritual. You take the most marginal residents of the, so they had a really good package deal, that they're lame and they're orphans, so it was even better to marry the two. I of course in the film it turns out as it's the climax, but it's also it turned out well for Fishka and Hodo, because they were in love, right? And I mean, with the setting of the cemetery, they have to die, right, in the shtetl in order to sort of live. So there's the process of rebirth after all, right? And it's a very surreal scene. It's an almost pagan celebration, it feels like. Although today too, I mean, people, right, Orthodox people do that. People go and lay on graves of tzaddikim. But then it also, but we see that this this old tradition, backward tradition, also provides Fishka and Hodel with the money, with the nest egg that
Right.
they.
So they move forward. By the way, to say it's you say it's backward or whatever, but of course, the ceremony today doesn't involve laying on graves. It now involves sending faxes to the tomb of the Lubavitcher Rebbe in Queens. There's a fax machine in his Ohel right on top of his grave.
I did not know that. I might take advantage of it.
Well, yeah, exactly. You never know when you'll need it.
Yeah. I mean, if we're there in the wedding, I might ask if you have any thoughts about the about the ending of the film, and we spoke about endings and about the endings of most of the films we screened this week. We had hopeful endings and cliche endings and double endings yesterday, right? And in this movie, we have this sense, sort of hope. I would say it seems like, at least, right, sort of going to the horizon towards this new future in the big city. And it ends in light, right? I mean, the movie begins in day, right? It begins in light and ends in light, and in the middle you have the shtetl and darkness. But Omer, the actors, the writers, I mean, they know what's going on, in 1939 in Europe, right? I mean, they know what's coming. So I don't know. So these scenes, you have these scenes where they cry. That scene where the Mendele cries out to God, right? Why have you deserted us? I mean, these are the scenes that really stick, kind of the long-lasting impressions that you get in the film. So I was wondering, this ending, is it a false ending? Is it a really hopeful ending? Even the title of the film, right? The light ahead. What is that? And what is that about? What is that light ahead when, all that waits for Jews is
And
destruction?
also there is this repartee by the rabbi who says, "Oh, look, Mayor," to the horse, right? The lame is leading the blind. He says, "Oh, the wonderful people of Israel," right? So there is also this premonition and humor. I thought, this reminded me so much of reading, to speak just in kind of associative terms, with Shalom Aleichem, and the humor and the pest in Odessa. It is a good.
You're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct.
Almost
You're
like
absolutely correct to make that link.
from Freud's jokes, all of these one-liners and this from the very beginning, these two, rabbis talking to each other or calling themselves rabbi. Very humorous, very, with the horse, why do you sit with me? This kind of that debate, the dialogue, which is always.
I think that was one of the stories of Mendeley Mahosor and the mayor. He actually has a
but at the same time, it's ominous, because it's lame leading, and it's the future, and it's 39. So you cannot say, anachronistically that they knew, but 39, Chaplin made The Great Dictator the same year, right? So it's also ominous. There's also
apropos Chaplin and City Lights was kind of in the back of my mind.
Or City Lights, because there is lights in the title also.
Yeah, in the blind.
City Lights, right? The blind.
It's ominous regardless, because it's speaking back to shtetl literature. So over the end of the 19th century, right, when the shtetls of Alsace-Lorraine get emptied, you have this flurry of shtetl stories, which are always about eventual annihilation and assimilation, So they may be going into some happy home, etc., but it generally means the end of a tradition, and it's a nostalgic look back. So here, I mean, you have the weight of the war that's, displaced onto other kinds of prejudices and difficulty. But going to the city, she says, we won't be made fun of. No one will know us as, she's talking about as having gone through a cholera wedding or for the disabilities, but basically to blend in to the nation is the dream. But of course, in 1939, that's already not happening. So it's sort of doubly nostalgic by taking up that traditional lit and then
Gail, sorry, Gail. I wouldn't use the word nostalgic there. I mean, that's what's characteristic of someone like Mendele, is that it's not nostalgic. This is
better, but it takes up this nostalgia for the shtetl, and it valorizes assimilation, but that assimilation by then is illusory.
The term that's used is anti-nostalgic.
Well, thank you for the term.
Oops. Sorry.
Do anybody have any questions from?
We had started to talk about the subtitles. Could you expand on that? Gail mentioned something about, she noticed, that I did too, that some of the chatter that the women had, they didn't translate it at all. Why is that?
Yeah, so I understand that thank you. That's a good question. It was definitely on my mind. I was frustrating watching the film. Because you see the characters talking and talking and talking, and then you'd have 3 words in English at the bottom. So for those of us who don't, not fluent in Yiddish, could have it did get frustrating. Like you're missing a lot of what's going on. But I understand that the original subtitles, the subtitles are original subtitles from the 30s. So there was one copy of that film that resurfaced, and those subtitles were already imprinted on the film in the negative. So there is some discrepancy between what the actors are saying and the translation we see on screen. So I assume that the target audience for this film, was a Yiddish speaking audience, which is why the subtitles were more of a summary, right, than of what's going on the screen, just not to be too literal or redundant, right? So since the subtitles are embedded, we're kind of stuck with those. I think that a few lines were added in this new version by the National Center of Jewish Film. But yeah, this is kind of what we have because of the history of this film, and because there's this one copy. A lot of we know that there are actually minutes missing from the film. Many scenes, I think they talked about 20 or 25 minutes of film that was missing. I assume that they looked at the first running time because there's also no script for the film, right? So we don't really know what, but it's a shorter version than what you had originally.
I noticed they were doing a lot of not translating of Hoden. So I was frustrated since, my comprehension is like this big. But I had a feeling they were doing summaries, for some reason, or just rounding it off. But it was a lot. Yeah.
And not just women. I don't think it's gender.
No, I noticed on the Hodel scenes,
There's a dog.
in the love scenes, that it was sort of 1 in 4.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think they were.
But men as well. I mean,
I take liberties, but not that many. So that was a lot of liberty. But you're right. It was probably for, a Yiddish speaking audience. Yeah.
It forced me to understand Yiddish because it's some ways close to German.
Well, it was charming. Jack said in the description, you like it just for hearing the native speakers. And it was true because my grandmother and all her sisters spoke Yiddish, so we wouldn't understand. And it was charming to hear. It was not charming to not understand.
You have to have starke Vorstellung. It's a very strong imagination. They said about Jewish people have to have strong. You have strong, starke Vorstellung.
I was curious. This is sort of random and probably not even the case, but the last name of the rabbi, Rabbi Alter. Does anybody have any understanding or knowledge of where this choice comes from?
What's it? Rabbi what?
Alter. And it was right at the time when...
Alter is a very common Yiddish name.
So you just think they picked it? Is there any read on this?
No, I'm sure it's symbolic, but it is a common Yiddish name.
Well, it's a common Yiddish name, but it's also a moment when Victor Alter is, making all kinds of news. So I was just curious if there was any way that that's playing in.
I think what it plays in is the folkloric element. And the reason why it's a common Yiddish name, because in families where there were a lot of death in childbirth or early death of babies, people would characteristically name the child Alter, meaning the old man, so the angel of death would be fooled. So, and I think it's just doffing its hat to that folkloric element.
And you don't think it's because Victor Alter is making all kinds of news for a decade by now on Jewish
film is not that political. I don't think so.
issues.
No, I doubt it. Was there any other element within the film that suggests?
I didn't pay attention until afterward when it just sort of came to me at the beginning. I had a flash of the subtitle. I was like, Rabbi Alter, and of course I read it as Alter because of our colleague Alter. But then I started thinking that there's a chance, because in terms of socialist and Jewish, especially Enlightenment almost pushed assimilation Jews, he was also of that ilk. So
But the characters in Mendele precede those politics.
Yeah.
no, they
But,
preceded.
no, but the
They
I
did
mean,
not.
but-
They precede his death, his execution, but certainly not Victor. No, he's arrested in 41.
Okay, but Mendele,
For instance, the 20s.
Mendele's not around by then.
no, but the subplot of the film is the Galaganska chicken. I mean, it's a political outcry. It's very,
Yeah,
very
and there's
politi-
political discussions, and Victor Alter is making all that noise in the 30s, not the 40s. He's dead in the 40s.
Yeah, so I wonder if this is something that was added by Omer, by the screenwriter, who was also a famous a Yiddish American writer. I mean, what I understand, the scenes that were cut are the Galaganska chicken, and it seemed like at first as a comic relief. It's a very colorful character, right? In the movie, but as it progresses, and especially as we get to the scene in the city hall, right, with the elite of the village, we see how painfully real it was for these people. It was about the kosher chicken, right? Kosher meat wasn't, I mean, it still is very expensive. And rabbis were charged extra for meat, to be declared kosher, and the charge went to the butcher, and the butcher, of course, was rolled it to the customer. It comes out of the customer pocket, and then the Galaganska chicken, right? It's nice and it's meaty and it's cheap, and it's when bought in the next town, right? But it's treif. It's treif, he yells, and it has to, and they won't certify it kosher, because the shtetl will lose the cut, right? Will lose the city tax that sort of makes that 100,000 ruble, whatever it is. So I think in that sense, it's very social, it's very political, and I know in New York at the time there was an outcry about certified kosher chicken or certified kosher meat. There's almost a Shakespearean moment there, the kind of a Shylock-y monologue. It's like half the Galaganska chicken doesn't crow as other chickens, lay eggs as other chickens. In the first guy's frustration. So it's really hurting. And
if you prick them, do they not bleed?
it's like, why is it? It's just a chicken? It's a chicken. Yeah. So he's I know they had much more of this in the original version, but it was cut and lost. But the hospital is definitely a very political statement, and you have to think how outrageous it was, at the time, to say such to come out again. The God will heal, God will take care of me, God will heal me, and then you say no, science, science will heal you.
But it's the politics of the shtetl.
Yeah, science will heal you. Going into the city and blending into the nation will heal you. Equality will heal you. There was this whole, surprising for the time, but creepy. This is the idea. You'll go into society and science, and equality will make us better. When you're in 1939, and we know it's illusory for decades already. So it had a creepy element, but the visuals were quite stunning. I have to say, I thought that they did a really nice job on the restoration.
And the visuals of the film, the set, the set production is beautiful, and that was Omer.
That was him too, yeah.
Yeah, he was. I think it was the set that was kind of his strength. He was a set designer before, and get this. So he did those psychological horror movies, right? And a lot of it kind of finds a way into this film, like surreal sets, right? Abstract sets. You have this creepy, trippy, the crooked lampposts and surreal graveyards, and kind of quite special, kind of Tim Burton-esque, feeling. And it was filmed in Jersey. It was filmed in New Jersey. So they really.
It's interesting that this owner of the chicken, he stutters. So you have all these cripples, all these. Right, it's almost like wedding in Cana in Galilee. The blind will see, the lame will walk. At the end, a little bit of this kind of Christic inscription to the ending. After all, he's making it also for the Hollywood kind of type movie, right?
Yeah.
A little bit kind of.
Yeah.
But it's a beautiful film. I mean, really. In Odessa, of course, you know, there is Yitzhak Babel. You know, there is another great writer of Odessa. It would be good to actually compare this film with Benya Creek. I will show this in my Russian Jews film, because there is Benya, the gangster, Benya Creek, right, from Odessa. There is Yitzhak Babel in the 20s. It's an amazing film and amazing stories about these gangsters who are pseudo-communists, right? They also distribute wealth, but they're gangsters, Jewish gangsters, right? As opposed to the communists. It's an amazing, and then, you know, Babel, of course, was deported after having written that. So it's interesting, this kind of.
Have a guest.
All good. I got tons of more there.
You're live. You're on live TV. Sorry.
You're on camera. Smile.
So I don't know. I mean, we dealt with the sort of the shtetl aspects of production. There is, you know, a love story in there, and I don't know if any of you want to comment, or if Roy, you want to comment on, or if you can't comment at the moment, but you know, on the love story, the interaction between the two, and or the roles. You know, I thought some of her resistance to her condition and having to beg, things like that, were interesting in terms of representation or transforming roles, gender roles in the shtetl, outside in the city. I don't know if any of you have any other comments. And if not, that's okay too, because the mosquitoes are eating me. Forgot about that.
I'm sorry, I couldn't focus on.
Oh, I said we dealt with some of the shtetl, and you talked to us about the production time period, but I didn't know if you want to talk at all about the couple. You know, there's a love story in there, and what do the way they have portrayed the gender roles in the film, if they speak to anyone, if anyone is interested. I noticed her, you know, horror at begging, right? So the sort of conditions that were possible, and if those conditions are changing as they move from shtetl to city.
Yeah.
Or even within the shtetl, kind of generational conflict.
Geweest. I'm saying geweest. I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. It's hard to say. No, because because thinking about the Odessa, but you know, the film ends as if they go to the modernized world, but they also remain in the state of the wandering Jew, right? So
Absolutely.
I was just struck by the sweetness of the couple, and for the time, how sexy they were, actually. You know, the whole apple scene when she does take the bite, that's a pretty, you know, hot scene. She's got her hands on her neck, she's breathing heavy, she's, you know, loving her apple, and then the next apple she gets, she doesn't like. I mean, I thought that it was surprising for me, given that I'm not really, you know, a 30s, 40s kind of film person, so I don't know what I'm looking at it against. But I was surprised at how charming they were as lovers.
yeah, I think mostly because it was a film, you know, it was a film in Yiddish, but it wasn't a niche, you know, sort of not a niche. But the actors, you know, the director was a legitimate Hollywood director. The actors were, you know, they were Yiddish stage actors, but they went on, I think, to play in big Hollywood films, right? What's the guy's name? I forget the actor who plays Fishka. He had that was his first role. David Apatow. That was his first role, but he went on to play in big Hollywood productions. So I think, they're doing, you know, they're doing a pretty good, you know, job.
But I think, you know, to answer to Gail's comment, that the primary thing that's there is the escape from the shtetl. It's a turning the back on the shtetl.
Absolutely.
It's why I sort of, you know, challenge you on the issue of the nostalgia. There really is no nostalgia there.
I know. What I said was, it takes
we
up.
look nostalgically on the shtetl, but they didn't. They really didn't.
But they're going to the wrong place, right? If you think about Chayagnon, the lady and the peddler, I mean, they're not going to Israel. They're going to the wrong, you know, they're going to a place that will still gobble them up.
Well, Odessa is a different place. Odessa is a very modern kind of place where Jews could be, they could be secular, they could be modern. They weren't dominated by the rabbinate. I mean, it was a very interesting place, intellectually, culturally, religiously, compared to much of the, and it was sort of outside the pale too.
Right. Well, to go back to taking issue with something I didn't say, the nostalgia literature is at the end of the 19th century. And even the nostalgia literature, it's written by assimilated Jews who are not that nostalgic, but they've got a topic and it sells to those who have left their various shtetls. So here it's a darker thing, but it's playing on that same tradition of the kind of shtetl stories that were written in the 80s and 90s of the 19th century. So I was really surprised to see it taken up again here, but I can see why, because you have two dark endings, not just the end of the shtetl, but probably the end of Judaism, which was only seen in those other narratives as through assimilation. They didn't expect, the Spanish Inquisition, and in 39, they're expecting Hitler. So, I thought the whole thing was pretty dark from start to finish.
It is dark. I mean, Mendel is dark.
Dark.
Read his other work, it's dark, but it is also interspersed with wonderful humor. His other writings.
Wow.
Benjamin III is a very funny book, but it's quite dark.
Yeah, in terms of darkness, it felt to me like the film was utilizing a lot of expressionist styles, a lot of moving in the shadows, the darkness. I feel like expressionism in films especially lends itself to stories that are morality based. A lot of this movie was talking about, what's right and what's wrong. And, obviously like you guys were talking about types of Jewishness and how it manifests with people. But, I very much liked the style of it. I felt like that it helped get the point of the movie across to me, and it was just visually beautiful,
Yeah.
and lent itself to the darkness that you guys were talking about.
Yeah, it was, and I think it was mostly shot in most of the scenes in the shtetl are shot in the dark,
In
right?
the dark, yeah.
In a dark setting. Yeah, and you're right about the
Or artificial light. There is the lichter,
Mhm.
the light, the guy who lights the lamp, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of projection. It's a film within a film.
Yeah. I loved you bringing up the Jewish morality. I think one of the sentence that stuck with me in the film is a Jew without a beard is better than a beard without a Jew. That was in the yeshiva there in the shul. That was a very good. Great. And any other? Anybody want to bring another point, or I think?
We like the film, but
Yeah. And thank you, Roy. It was really a wonderful presentation.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
My
Thank you.
pleasure. No,
Thank you.
for the opportunity.
Yeah. Might want to tell us about tomorrow?
Yes, tomorrow night is the 8th night of the festival, and it will be Marry Me However, which is an interesting documentary about individuals who have chosen to marry in more traditional relationships while they are acknowledged that they are gay. And so the film takes us through these different ways that these have manifested and sort of the way that it's affected them and the people that they've married. So it'd be an interesting.
These are Orthodox or ultra Orthodox.
Right. Yes, I should think it's a key point there too.
It's not. It is not Kispi kosher.
Yes.
It's
So
an
this-
interesting. It's an interesting. It's a really interesting subject, and
Yep.
yeah.
And Dr. Kawashima will moderate the talkback session, and it'll be 7:30.
Mhm.
Thank
It's
you.
an interesting film. I really do recommend it. It's very timely.
Well, thank you, everybody. Have
Yes,
a
thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you,
Weekend.
Madeline and Jamie.
Thank you
for
again,
coming.
Roy. Thank you,
Thank you,
Virginia.
Virginia.
Thank you, John, everybody, Madeline.
Yeah.
Bye bye.
And Roy.
Nice evening. See you soon.
See you tomorrow.
Yeah.
Nice night.
Um,